Hi folks, my name is Catherine and I am the Community Outreach Coordinator at Path Employment Services. For those of you joining us for the first time, thank you for watching us on our Let's Talk Career series. We host these series on a weekly basis for individuals who would like to learn more about different careers. And each one of our guests shares a very unique journey with us, and they share some challenges, accomplishments, and some helpful tips and some great life stories for those thinking about getting into certain careers. So today I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Joel Dembe. Hi, Joel, and thank you for joining us today.
Catherine.
So
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So Joel works in financial services, and he's a global accessibility and inclusion advocate, a Paralympian, and has done Tedx TED Talks speakers as well as a few other speaker talks. I've listened to a couple today as well. So very interesting. Thank you for the information. Very enlightening listening to things from your point of view. So where do you want to start today on your career journey? Joel, I'll let you lead us.
I have a very non-traditional career path. So let me just start with that. But I will say, I hope everyone tuning in and watching today is safe. I know there's a lot going on at the moment, and maybe in future years when people tune into this video, they'll want some context. So hopefully one day we'll be able to do this in person when it's safe to do so. But from my standpoint, I have to trace my career right to childhood. So I was born with a disability. I spent a lot of my childhood in and out of the hospital here in Hamilton, at Master Children's Hospital. And, I had the understanding at a very early age that I did things a bit differently than my classmates. I had an obsession with wanting to be included and feeling included and wanting to keep up with all of my able-bodied friends. I grew up with a wheelchair. I had a spinal tumor at birth. So, being in a wheelchair is essentially all I've ever known, from the age of 6 or 7, quite honestly. So growing up, I felt the best way to be included and to show people that I wasn't necessarily just some person that you'd see in a wheelchair was to play sports. And so my mom and dad threw me into sports at a very early age, whether it was wheelchair, track and field, para ice hockey, challenger baseball here in Hamilton, golf, and lots of other different fun sports. But then I was introduced to wheelchair tennis around the age of 13. And there used to be these old tennis courts at Mohawk College. That's since been, replaced with something else. But my first foray into wheelchair tennis was right here in Hamilton. And thanks to, volunteers and, my former coaches, I got quite good at tennis at a very early age and was given the opportunity to travel on behalf of Canada as a wheelchair tennis athlete around the world. It led to some incredible opportunities. But really, when I think about what sport gave me, and if you probably saw part of this covered in the TED Talk I delivered a few years back, was confidence. And I think for anyone, not the least of which are people with disabilities, but sport does build confidence. It builds a sense of community, friendships. I was painfully shy. Hard to believe. Now people can't keep my mouth shut. But for the better part of my childhood, I struggled to fit in. I struggled to socialize, make friends. Once I, got involved in tennis, that was it for me. It led to so many incredible opportunities. I was able to travel to nearly every continent in the world. I, eventually got to the national team. And it was an incredible opportunity to represent Canada, obviously culminating and representing our country, the London 2012 Paralympics, and also in numerous tournaments around the world. And some of my closest friends and people that I know come from Canada's tennis community. We have a very strong, small family, even though tennis is now definitely on the map for Canada. And so I felt like I was kind of part of that national conversation on the growth of tennis in Canada, even doing so as a wheelchair tennis player. And I should say one of the unique things about wheelchair tennis is the fact that I could play with my family and friends, all of whom were able-bodied. So again, that sense of being included was so important for me at an early age. And it's no wonder that I loved wheelchair tennis, because I could play against able-bodied athletes. In fact, I enjoyed beating able-bodied athletes. It gave me a lot of pleasure, I gotta say, selfish pleasure, but pleasure nonetheless. And again, it opened the world to me. And, you know, at the same time, both my parents stressed education. And one of the things when you're, you know, obviously, you know, have a physical disability, thinking about what university or what college you want to go to, I had my eyes always set on the Niagara region, because that's where I was training. I was training at the Niagara Tennis Academy in Vineland, Ontario. The Niagara region has a rich history of developing some top tier tennis talent over the years. And so I went to Brock University, but I chose Brock University because it was also a very wheelchair accessible campus. It's a very new campus when you think about in comparison to University of Toronto or McMaster. So getting around the campus and the community of St. Catharines was really easy. And I took sports management, and I was really proud to get involved in sport at an administration standpoint, in addition to pursuing wheelchair tennis. And when I graduated, I had some choices to make. Should I pursue, you know, a high performance wheelchair tennis career, or should I focus on, you know, my work career? I attempted to do both. That was difficult, probably not the right decision, but you know, I was hired in a marketing capacity at one of Canada's largest banks, TD. And this was, you know, almost 12, 13 years ago. And I was also at the same time named to Canada's national wheelchair tennis team. So it was a lot of balancing a bunch of things at once. But what I will say is it's very tough to go all in when you're doing two things that, quite frankly, are all consuming. In order to be a high performance athlete, it's very difficult to work full-time hours while training at night and showing up to be your best the following morning, or going to a tournament in Dallas, taking a red eye late on a Sunday and coming right from Pearson Airport right into the, you know, the corporate office. That was difficult. And so I had to make you know, after a few years in working in the in marketing, I had to make a choice. I chose to leave working in the financial services industry and train full time. I trained differently. I was able to get the rest that I needed. But it opened up a lot of doors. You know, it's a very unique thing being, you know, a national athlete, not the least of which is, you know, being a wheelchair athlete. And, you know, I went full throttle into training, eventually rose to the top of the Canadian rankings, Paralympics, did that for a few years, and retired after winning a medal with my doubles partner, Philippe Bedard, who's from Montreal, at the end of the 2015 Pan Am Games right here in Toronto, which was incredible because most of the tournaments that I traveled to were very far away from Canada, you know, South America, South Africa, Korea, all across Europe and United States. So it was nice to finish my tennis career with a medal for Canada. But I didn't want to rest. I wanted to go right back into working. So I re-entered the financial services industry. You know, I really wanted to focus on marketing communications, and it eventually led to a full-time career in corporate communications. And so literally, I feel like I've retired from one career, and now I've in the last few years started a completely different life, and it's given me a lot of meaning and a purpose. And that's what I want to do at the end of the day. I want to wake up knowing that I'm around great people doing great work. I don't think I would be myself if I didn't have my work or something that I was motivated to do. And I feel like every day I can get up, as difficult as it is some days in the COVID-19 environment we're all living in, to do my best and to want to achieve more and to push against barriers, whether they're physical or invisible. And I think there's a lot of them right now, especially for employees with disabilities, or at least prospective employees with disabilities.
Yeah, and I understand that. So with your accessibility and inclusion hat that you wear, what does that look like? Does that help you with the job there that you're in, or is it more community based?
In terms of advocacy, this is, and most people think, Joel, you've been an advocate your whole life on disability. Not really. I was an advocate on high performance sport and wanting to encourage kids and people with disabilities, students, to stay active no matter their abilities. That's always been important. But then I came to a more fundamental understanding that in a lot of ways in society, disability is invisible. Of course it is. Most disabilities are invisible. In fact, even right now, in an ironic way, we're talking over Zoom. You can't see the fact that I even use a wheelchair. So on one hand, it's empowering. It's not the first thing you see anymore. You see my face. It's sunburned right now and my hair is everywhere, but that's COVID. But it's empowering on one sense, but the gap is that we don't see disability the way it should be represented. In fact, 1 in 5 Canadians, as you know, have a disability. But most of Canada is just not aware of it. We're all impacted by disability, whether through age, pre-existing condition. We might be a caregiver of a family member with a disability. And it's a big untapped market. And I want to see more people with disabilities get the opportunity to show their skills. And I think one way to do that is to work in accessibility. Accessibility in so many ways is compliance, a legal requirement. We know about the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. We know in the United States, they have the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's not enough to just be accessible. And I think in our heads, we think accessibility means a ramp into a building, an elevator to get up to your floor. But digitally, it means a lot different now, does it? It's about captioning. It's about transcripts. It's about making your products and services available to the most amount of people in Canada. And so if 1 in 5 Canadians have a disability, organizations, corporate, nonprofit, public, need to readdress their platforms and services to make them accessible, universally accessible, so that everyone can use them. Because it makes a lot of business sense to me, but it also provides an element of opportunity, especially for people with disabilities who have the lived experience of living in a world that's just fundamentally not designed for them. And that was my experience. And so I do think there are career opportunities specifically in accessibility, but also understanding that organizations are looking for untapped understanding of different perspectives. And obviously that's important to Canada's growth. We know that in order for Canada to compete on the world stage, we're going to need a diverse workforce. We're going to need newcomers, folks with different backgrounds, abilities like myself. So this is a conversation that we need to keep pushing, not just me, but every leader, not just here in Hamilton, but nationwide.
Yeah, I agree. That's what PATH focuses on. We're focusing on individual skills, not their disability, but also there's a lot of employers out there that they want to hire someone with a disability because they want to be accessible and inclusive, and that's the best way for them to learn what they need to do in order to become that way, is to hire somebody who has those needs and the accessibility needs that, to move to the next our next generation of this is what everyone needs to be. It's the law now. It's not something you can overlook anymore. We need to be moving forward and make sure everyone's included, because everyone deserves an opportunity to be successful in whatever they want to do. So
I think we, in so many ways become reactive. We only address, disability inclusion or inaccessibility when you hear about it. But what if we fundamentally became more proactive about addressing accessibility? I think if organizations and buildings and, Hamilton was fundamentally accessible, there would be an element of empowerment and also autonomy that I think is really important. I know I discussed that at TED Talk, the notion of independence, but the ability to go to work, do your best and go home at the end of the day is something that I think a lot of us take for granted, but fundamentally, it's still the gap that a lot of, prospective employees with disabilities are facing every day of their lives. And so I think we need to hear those stories, but also find ways to match abilities with opportunities. And I think there's a ton of them. We're very lucky to live in Canada, a G8 country, with the economic potential. And we just need to probably continue to do a better job of including disability in our broader diversity and inclusion initiatives nationwide.
Yeah, I agree. So the job that you're doing now, did you go to school to get into the financial service industry?
I joke that 5 years ago, my job was hitting a ball over a net. And then 5 years before that, I was in a marketing role, learning, what corporate life is like, and working in an organization. And, I've had some other gigs between those corporate things, but in terms of corporate communications, your role in comms, it's called different things, whether it's public relations, in the financial services sector, it's corporate communications. Your job is ultimately to protect and enhance the reputation of the company you serve. So, one thing that has been very great for me is really getting a look into media. I always thought one day, and actually, funny enough, I have a picture of this. I thought I'd be a broadcaster one day. Okay. I thought, yeah, that'd be really cool. I get to be on CBC or sports broadcaster. I should say I've worked for CBC as a contributor to the 2018 Paralympics. So I have some element of media experience, but the media landscape's changing, and so in turn, corporate communications is fundamentally changing. The notion of influencers and social media, paid marketing, and the lines being crossed between marketing and communications. But, looking at, the corporate comms in general, I would say, definitely a lot of the colleagues that I work with have journalism backgrounds, some have marketing backgrounds, some have political backgrounds, some themselves are former broadcasters and folks who cover the financial services industry. My background was just one of being curious. I did sports management for 4 years at Brock University, but right after that, I actually took a marketing certification course at Sheridan, another great college in Ontario that is wheelchair accessible. And I learned a lot about marketing communications and definitely felt like that was more in my element. Not to say that sports aren't something that I'm not currently involved with. That's not the case at all. I'm very much involved as a volunteer. I always dip my toe into matters related to amateur sports and sport inclusion. But cracking the sports scene is difficult. Not everyone, can have the lifestyle of even working for a team like the Toronto Blue Jays, or the Toronto Raptors. It's all consuming. And so here I was graduating Brock University, but needing the time to carve with tennis. Yeah. But, and it was one of the unique things I actually had was a lot of my colleagues come from so many different places themselves too. So I don't feel you necessarily have to have a background in journalism or PR to get in the door, but I think it would really help. It would help with the foundations. Those are things that I've had to catch up to. But at the same time, if you have a passion for media, the news, passion for business, and in shareholder strategies, and looking at investments, PR is probably a good maneuver, but it's competitive. There's not as many positions in PR, in every company. A lot of it is done through agencies. So there's a lot of opportunities in agencies, both marketing and comms related, but it's an exciting, all-consuming career. It's 24/7. I love it. It really is a great way to network, not just internally within your company, but outside of it, and to add an element of thought leadership. I think that's the other thing I really love. I love ideas. I'm curious. I'm an advocate too, as you know. So those are all things that comms folks, communications folks can influence within a company, influence leaders. So there is some semblance of empowerment that I do have in communications. It's a terrific career, but it's not for everyone. You want to be able to write. You want to be able to be confident with your words, make your words bounce off the screen, be readable, capture the voice of whoever you're writing for, whether it's the organization or a specific leader. I can imagine a former director of mine would share books on famous speeches. We all remember John F. Kennedy's moon landing speech, and there's empowerment to words, and words can often lead to some incredible things. And a lot of that happens by a great speechwriter. And, it's funny because I would often do motivational talks, when I was playing tennis and even after tennis. And the notion of presenting into an audience was something that I knew a lot about, even going into communication. So being on the other side of it now and writing the speeches is pretty incredible. So lots of opportunities in communications and marketing in so many capacities. It's exciting.
Sounds like it. You make it sound exciting. I don't know that I could do that kind of job. Like, this is as far as I can go with my communication and sales and marketing, but you make the job sound exciting.
It's 24/7 at times, but especially now, and but it's exciting, and but I'd encourage anyone interested in getting into a communications or public relations or publicist type role to really pay attention to the news scene, specifically here in Canada. Start following podcasts that CBC produces. Get to know National Post and the specific journalists and editors, and that's really important. If you understand the Canadian news scene and sort of where things are heading, and not just Canada, but read the Financial Times, read the Guardian, read things you don't agree with. That's important. Unfortunately, obviously over the last few months with relation to elections and other things, the news can be very powerful, but so I would definitely be careful, only fact checking one source, and think about what's happening right now, not just here in Hamilton or Ontario, but nationwide. Communication, people are confused. I'm confused.
Oh, goodness,
I'm hearing communications from our cities, our provinces. I'm hearing some other stuff from other people. My mom's confused. I'm confused. That starts with communication. So as much as sometimes it's nice to drive and communicate all the time, sometimes the simplest message is the most effective. And so sometimes you have to get out of your own way as a communicator and let a message resonate, but also be actionable. If you're confusing people, that's up to the comms folks that support our governments right now. And so, just from my perspective as a communicator, I'm confused, and I don't want to be confused anymore with relation to guidelines and things like that. So that's another important role that communications can play, specifically to governments during a health crisis. It's important.
Yeah, because if you give the wrong information, you mislead so many people, and so much
absolutely
happen from that. So if you were looking back at your younger self, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Wow, I mean, there's a lot. I think number one would be stay competitive, stay hungry, don't lose optimism. I think in a lot of ways, the longer you spend in a career, the more cynical you might become. But I always remember the feeling of looking at what my classmates were doing or other colleagues were doing, and I felt like I was left behind. And now I'm in an environment where I do feel included. I do feel supported. So I always count myself pretty lucky that I am in a supportive environment. But I, want to remind younger Joel that that it's not a straight line to get there. That you will have to take major risks. Some of those risks will not pay off, but I'd rather be a risk taker and know that I took my best shot than to be complacent. I never want to be complacent, and you can't. It's too competitive. It's a competitive workforce right now. I always remember, there were times in my tennis career where I did get complacent. And when you get complacent, what happens? You lose your number one ranking. You lose first round. You can't take things for granted. But I would also say to breathe. I'm pretty hyper. Maybe that comes across on screen here, but is to slow down, is to breathe, and sometimes you do have to be patient. And I think for those tuning in, especially folks with disabilities, we're often told that we are patient. We have to be patient. I've never been patient. I've never been patient, and I have to keep reminding myself to be patient. And I would remind myself that some things don't happen overnight, even if you want to bend reality. And oftentimes I remember as a young student thinking certain things were just hopeless and I wanted them to just change overnight. But just like investments over the long run, you see where those things. And I think the other thing is, I always remember the line, comparison is the thief of joy. So stop comparing yourself to other people. You're unique. You have incredible abilities. Look at where you were 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was hitting a ball over a net. I didn't have a job. I didn't really know anything about PR or communications other than what I was told. But growth can when I look back over 5 years, I have accomplished a lot. And I think we all have to stop comparing ourselves to other people who are in completely unique situations. And I think that's the echo chamber, unfortunately, of social media, is that often, and I can say this as someone in communications, oftentimes you promote the best of yourself. And so you're not seeing the other side. You're not seeing the folks who come into work and are struggling with mental health and wellness. Just know that we're all in this together. And again, stop comparing yourself. Look at where you were 5 years ago and see if you can track some progress there. That's important.
That's really good advice. Yeah, I think for everyone. And you're part of the Rick Hansen Foundation as well. Is this is a volunteer role that you
volunteer?
Nice.
It's so funny because when I grew up, there were two icons that I identified with, that we all identified with, was Terry Fox and Rick Hansen, both of whom were wheelchair basketball teammates in British Columbia all those years ago. And I wanted to get involved in the Rick Hansen Foundation because I identified with its mission. We've changed our approach over the years. We're really involved in schools now, educating kids about disabilities, about accessibility, about kindness, about empathy. Those are important themes that I think are not just impactful as part of the Rick Hansen Foundation, but are things we all need, especially in this current environment. So especially now. So, the one thing I know about the Rick Hansen Foundation is that it has a really good reputation amongst a corporate audience. And I felt like, in tandem with my career back in the corporate audience, that there was some links that I could have with the Rick Hansen Foundation. I've learned a lot. I love talking to kids. I often will talk to students about my life. I always root my talks with them. Meaning I don't talk too much about what life's like as an adult. I talk to kids who are between the ages of 6 and 14, and I always make sure to talk about my experiences as a student with a disability, and really remembering all the incredible teachers that I had, gym teachers, Ms. Williams, Mr. Reed, Ancaster High School. Honestly, teachers are the unheralded heroes of my life. The good ones, just kidding. They're all great. Some of them maybe, but anyway. But teachers, I love teachers that challenged me, that treated me like everyone else. And so even though I'm presenting to students, I'm really presenting to teachers, because I know what it's like being the only kid in an entire school that uses a wheelchair. That's different. But what's great is that oftentimes now I'll talk to a class on behalf of the foundation, and I see so much diversity that I didn't see 30 years ago. And I think it's really important to reinforce differences with kids. That being in a wheelchair or having a disability shouldn't limit you from making friends or being included at recess. And that's so important. And I want kids to be able to see disability and not feel like it's something that they should either ignore or fear, for that matter. So being able to impact students, and let's be honest, I feel like a kid still, so I get a lot out of it, and especially making them laugh and talking about disability inclusion is really powerful.
Nice. Do you still play tennis?
I should. I've been one of the things that and probably I look a little bit different than maybe in my tennis career. I've actually lost some weight, ironically, but I haven't been playing tennis the last few years, and it's something I miss, but it's also something that I need to get back into that doesn't cause pain. And so we all, I think a lot of people on who are tuning in, deal with pain every day of their life, and they have to somehow overcome that pain and deliver their best to their employer every day. And near the end of my career, I started getting injuries. I was trying to figure out my body, and now it's funny, I put on you're strapped into this different wheelchair and it hurts me. So I think one thing I need to do is design a different wheelchair for me that will make it more comfortable for me to play, not necessarily competitively, but to coach. And one of the things I did just after I retired was getting my coaching certification with Tennis Canada. So I really believe in sport. So the fact that I'm not actively contributing to the growth of tennis in Canada, specifically wheelchair tennis, is something that I know I need to come full circle with. And so, yeah, I am making steps to get back involved. And again, we need to get more athletes, not just in wheelchair tennis, but more broadly. So honestly, if there's folks on this webcast that are interested in playing a wheelchair sport, Catherine, I think you'll provide my LinkedIn information, maybe later, or would love to connect with you. We're looking for wheelchair athletes. We're looking for athletes, not just wheelchair athletes, but it's important. Wheelchair tennis is the single most important thing in my life, and so is physical wellness. It's important to take care of yourself, and many of us struggle to find the time to work out every day or go for a walk, to take time to breathe in the morning. And I think that is another piece of advice, but also something that I'd encourage everyone to prioritize, because you're not going to be your best at work if you're not in your best physical shape, to the best of your ability. And we can all impact that, no matter our abilities.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with that. And I hope that they encourage it more with school. If they're shut down, that there's activities that they can encourage the youth to go out and engage in safely, obviously, but not to just, we can't just close ourselves off in our room and do nothing. I mean, that's just going to be devastating for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges of COVID-19, and I've obviously had challenges with that. I joined a gym that no longer is on operation here in Hamilton, and it closed like many small businesses did throughout the pandemic. And so in some ways you might have to get creative. I converted my garage into a gym. I have one of those hand cycles. I put it on a bike trainer. You gotta find a way to stay active every day. It's so important. It's even more important if you have a pre-existing condition or a disability. On one hand, I don't like excuses, but everyone has different abilities, and you can take time for yourself. You can take time to rest, to recover, and look after yourself. So make that the priority before anything else. Because, you know, if you're not at your best, it is going to impact you and your career.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to share? I kind of covered all my questions. I mean, I have hundreds of more after watching all your videos, but we'd be on here first.
I would encourage everyone to really lean into your personal branding. You know, no one, your prospective employer, you know, needs to know who you are. I think authenticity is so important. So don't be afraid to show a little bit of your personality. I've not been too afraid of that at work. Maybe sometimes it might get me in trouble, but it is important to brand yourself and to be a little self-promotional. You know, be entrepreneurial, be curious, but know it's very competitive. So what sets you apart from the rest of the 100 applicants, you know, applying to your job? What makes you unique? Tap into volunteer opportunities, just like I have with the Rick Hansen Foundation. Hamilton has a great history of giving back and getting involved. There's so many ways, whether you're interested in getting involved in the environment or, you know, so many other ways to stay involved. Obviously, we're all pretty challenged to do things safely right now throughout COVID-19. But if you don't have a lot of career experience, I'd challenge you to get that experience through volunteering. And it doesn't take a lot. It's a great way to meet friends, especially here in Hamilton and allies. And you never know who that volunteer you're working alongside is. It could be someone who's an influencer, someone who might connect you with their employer. But yeah, don't take those volunteer opportunities for granted. You know, there's so many ways, and Catherine, I'm sure through PATH, there's other ways to get involved in supporting employments, and it is important. And so I would encourage everyone to stay involved and to stay active in a volunteer capacity. I learned that through my father. He was so involved, not just with everything I was doing, but in so many ways here in Hamilton, getting involved in the community. And you can be a leader just through volunteering and learn to develop those leadership qualities. I've learned that myself. So don't wait for those opportunities to be handed to you. Don't wait for career opportunities to be handed to you. Lean in, be resourceful, network. You've heard that from probably a million people in the past. So I won't, you know, I won't echo that right now, but I will say it does pay off long term if you can build a good group of allies around you. And be authentic. Tell people who you are and what you can bring to the table and some of the unique things you've accomplished throughout your life. That's so important. And I know it's something that employers value.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you, Joel. I appreciate you being on our Let's Talk Disability. I'll share your information. And if anybody wants to reach out, thank you again.
And thank you, Catherine, for all the work that you and PATH Employment Services are doing specifically here in Hamilton. There's a lot of work I know involved in doing the work that you do. So I appreciate you, and I know a lot of others appreciate you. And thanks for doing this talk with me today. I hope everyone learned a lot, and hopefully everyone stays safe.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.